All right. Well, good morning, everyone. Welcome. Appreciate you joining. I'm assuming it's good morning, and I know we're in a global world now, so I should probably say good day. Today, we're going to be talking about developing team resilience by leveraging project management principles. My name is Dr. Hasnain Rizvi, and I've been in this project management space for far too long. I'm going to try and talk to you about, some of the principles behind project management that really can give us the strength to develop teams and build that resilience. And what does that word resilience really mean? Is something that we'll talk about. And so I'm going to tie it in with something that is very dear to all of us right now, this topic of COVID-19, obviously. Something that has taken us all by surprise, and it continues to amaze us as to how resilient this particular virus is, or this particular pandemic is. And really, it's about time that we defeat this thing. We all know that someone out there has been impacted by this. I know I have in my own family as well, unfortunately. All right, so what's our agenda today? I'm going to walk you through 10 secrets to achieving a successful project outcome in uncertain times. And again, that's where we'll bring in that team resilience piece, um, where we'll talk about the core project management principles that'll really enable you to attain, to open up those 10 secrets essentially. And then we'll open up the floor to any questions and comments from yourself. So please feel free as I'm going through the presentation. If you have any questions, any comments, please feel free to put them in the chat box. I'll be happy to address them along the way. I am keeping an eye out on the chat box today. All right. Okay, very good. So let's do some level setting first. Before we can get into project management, let's make sure we're all on the same page in terms of what a project actually is, right? And I'm going to, we have a choice of several definitions out there actually, but I'm going to use the one from the Project Management Institute that the PMBOK guide has had in there for years. And right now, the PMBOK guide has just gotten updated to the 7th edition. I was one of the humble contributors that wrote the new edition of the book as well. And this definition has remained unchanged for at least 15, 16 years. So a project, according to PMI, is a temporary endeavor, right? So it's time boxed. Essentially, you and I as human beings, we really, if you don't have deadlines, can you imagine getting anything done if there wasn't a deadline for homework, if there wasn't a deadline for the exam, if there wasn't, think about elementary school, middle school, high school, college, university days. I mean, without deadlines, we get nothing done, right? And the same goes as we get into our professional lives. So this temporary element is really extremely valuable and potent. So a project is a temporary endeavor. And at the end of the project, you are delivering something valuable. It should be valuable, at least we hope, where you get a product, service, or result of some value. It's a unique product, service, or result that adds, value. Could be, obviously in a for-profit entity, it could be something that's actually generating additional revenue for you. In a nonprofit, it could be a service that is being provided to citizens of the nation, for example. But nonetheless, whatever value may be perceived as, we need to be delivering valuable elements along the way. And of course, as we're going through projects, we go through what's known as progressive elaboration, which essentially means that as you work through things, you're unraveling more and discovering more. And it's a constant journey in terms of what we're learning along the way as we're working through a project. Now, one of the goals of project management is to reduce this thing known as the cone of uncertainty. I don't have a lot of time to go through this in detail, but essentially this picture should convey a message to you that when we start a project with the ideation, some vague idea in our head about a problem, an issue, or even an opportunity, there are lots of possibilities. For example, if I was just to take the example of a solution or even an estimate for how long something will take or how much something will cost, initially it'll be quite a wide range, right? Until we sort of dig deeper, start figuring details out, and as we sort of jump into the pool, then we really figure out how deep this pool is. And project management principles and practices help us reduce this cone of uncertainty. We can never get it to a zero-sum game, obviously, because there will always be some element of uncertainty out there. Now, we live in a world, according to the Project Management Institute, we live in a world that has enterprise environmental factors. What are enterprise environmental factors? These are factors that you and I do not control, right? No one in your team controls these factors. I don't control these factors. The leadership doesn't control these factors, yet they influence us. So, for example, new regulations, we don't control that. Climate change, politics, what does country A announce today? Uh, you know, Tariffs, all kinds of things that affect us, taxation rules, a change in politics within your own, for example, nation, or within even your own county or city or state or province sometimes can have an impact. And then internally, your board of directors decides to do a merger or an acquisition, or they decide to go public, or they decide to reverse and go back into a private space. These are factors that you and I don't control. Price of oil goes up and goes down. We have no control over that. Yet these things influence our projects, right? So that again requires an element of resilience within the organization amongst the team members. So how do we do that? One of the really valuable things that we can have in an organization, according to again the Project Management Institute, are organizational process assets. Again, I focus on the word assets here because an asset is something of value to the organization. What are organizational process assets? Your own existing processes and procedures, right? Essentially, your own way of working, if I may put it in simple terms, right? By having some robust policies, procedures, and guidelines that take into account the uncertainties that may arise along the way, you're actually preparing your team members and associates to be able to deal with such eventualities when they occur. And the other thing that's extremely powerful is a corporate knowledge base. So right now, as we're going through the COVID-19 fiasco, I'm hoping that organizations, the clients that I'm working with, I'm helping them build out corporate knowledge bases. We want to have lessons learned captured from these experiences so that the next time this happens, we learn from it. One of the big things that came out of Hurricane Katrina about 16 years ago in the US here um, Hurricane Katrina was a disaster at every level, city, state, federal, you name it, FEMA, and here in the United States really sort of unfortunately was overwhelmed by it, and uh, none of the layers of government could effectively come into action there, as was witnessed by the world. But the one thing that came out of it, if there was a positive out of Katrina, it was that we got really valuable lessons learned, and those were captured. So the next time a hurricane hit the US, like when Hurricane Sandy hit and others that have come since then, we've got those really valuable lessons learned from Katrina of what not to repeat, right? So that corporate knowledge base becomes extremely valuable for us, it becomes a genuine asset for us. And, there are obviously going to be natural disasters, man-made disasters of all kind. I recall when Hurricane Igor hit Newfoundland and Labrador, the office that actually stepped in, the government, I was working for the government in Newfoundland and Labrador back then, they actually pulled us in. I was working for the project management office back then within the government, and we were pulled in to deal with this emergency and crisis because we were seen as that resilient arm of government. So during a crisis, you step in And within a time-boxed approach, you come up with solutions that will mitigate the impact of a disaster. So we need project resilience, right? Uh, the Project Management Institute talks about this. Excellus talks about this. The Scaled Agile Framework talks about this. You name it, all those bodies. Six Sigma talks about this. What is project resilience? What does this word resilience really mean from a practical perspective? Essentially, what it means is we need to have enough of a solid backbone within the organization that if a storm hits us, as surprises hit us, as uncertainties overwhelm the universe, we should be able to stand firm and still be able to deliver value. That's the key thing. The ability to continue to deliver value is what we're talking about here. So this requires a mindset shift. This requires us to accept the fact that we live in a world with VUCA. It's something that's come out of the military, the US military, a couple of decades ago. We live in a world that has increasing volatility, increasing uncertainty, increasing complexity, and increasing ambiguity. This alone could be a lecture for another day. But without getting into the details of what each of these four pillars mean in tremendous detail, the English words themselves should be indicative for you. And I think you all would agree that we're living in a world where all four of these are increasing. And that requires a mindset shift. The realization that not everything is 100% predictable. And so that requires our associates and team members, and then onwards up to leadership, to be prepared for that and to plan for that proactively and to have that business agility that as we get hit with uncertainties, as we encounter ambiguities, and more of them, we will be able to, leveraging business agility, we will be able to pivot, adjust, refine as needed along the way. So we need an integrated risk management approach, right? And again, the best way to manage risk, as any other area of project management, is to have your most valuable resources prepared for that, which are your human resources. So let's walk down our recommendations. Number one, let's take COVID as an example again, because that's sort of on our minds nowadays. It'd be a little easy to sort of refer to. Number one, we need an environment where we can assist project and program managers to assess the impact of COVID-19 on their projects and programs. So, if you have a project management office in your organization, or whether it's a formal one or informal one, this would be an excellent place for them to step in, right? To support a rational assessment and response to something like the COVID outbreak and its impact on projects. That's how you build resilience, by actually doing a rational assessment, removing all the emotions out, removing the extra noise that is sort of overwhelming resources when there is a crisis or emergency, whether it's man-made, natural, whether it's a competitor response, whether it's a new government regulation, or whether it's COVID-19. Number two, we need to prepare for business continuity, not just during, but also after this pandemic is over. So in project management, we call this remember the future. Essentially, what this says is you need to be a step ahead of the game. When you're remembering the future, and if you build that mindset within your team members, essentially what happens here is that your team members are not only looking to solve the current crisis, but they're also thinking two steps ahead and thinking about how the world will be after this particular issue is resolved. So after this pandemic is over, what will happen? I mean, let's not just focus on getting through this pandemic. but let's actually have a more broad view. And again, the question that arises is, what is your team doing today to prepare for tomorrow? Tomorrow being after this pandemic is over. And trust me, we will get through it. It doesn't feel like we're going to get through this COVID fiasco, but we will. Number three, you build resilience in your associates and teams by making them the valuable source of reliable information, the single source of truth. So, there's a lot of noise out there. And even within the organization, when there's a crisis or an emergency of any kind, internal or external, the rumors and unofficial messages and, paranoia and concern, and some of it is unfounded, starts cultivating itself. And if not managed effectively, can really be quite damaging to the productivity of the organization and then eventually the sustainability of the organization if it gets really really cancerous. So it's important that we remind the organization of the actual facts and truth, right? And the project management teams are an excellent source for that because they're the ones in the dungeons. They're actually out there doing the work. They're actually in the front lines of dealing with the various projects and initiatives that are running within the organization. And it's a great idea to obviously leverage information radiators, dashboards, visuals that make it easy to convey information that is not overwhelming. Number four, I touched upon this briefly earlier, which is basically something that the PMBOK guide calls manage project knowledge. It's one of the processes they have in there. We need to support learning organizations. We need to have that learning mindset amongst our associates, right? Uh, this becomes extremely important. We're dealing with a situation. I know right now in the United States, I've got a couple of clients I'm dealing with. One's a major energy oil and gas entity. They're relabeling themselves to be energy companies now. Apparently, that's the cooler name. Actually, based out of the UK, but I don't want to reveal their name per se. But they were one of the larger players. You could probably guess. Um, and I'm also another client of mine is a cancer hospital, one of the largest cancer hospitals in the world. And they both are suffering from a major crisis right now, which is this sort of resignation era of some sort, which is bizarre that talented resources are departing from organizations, especially those that are not providing some sort of flexibility in terms of ability to work from home and hybrid and things of that nature. So we're losing key resources, and with them, their knowledge goes. Unfortunately, we just lost someone who'd been with our organization for 16 years. One of the clients I'm working with. 16 years is extremely valuable information that's walking out the door, right? Of course, there's also the danger of resources not being available because of getting ill or someone in their family getting ill, things of that nature. So we need this knowledge base in place to build that resilience within the organization. The fifth one is where we need to leverage SWOT analysis, where we check out the strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats of the project management office itself. So if you have a project management office, whether a formal or informal one, it's a good idea to quickly do an assessment of its strengths and weaknesses as well as the opportunities and threats. This will help you build a better PMO roadmap for how to support project management and, of course, the associates within those project management teams. Then we need to critically review the project management office roadmap or even just project management in general across the organization. We need to make sure this roadmap is realistic. Does it align with the organization? Does it align with the current circumstances and scenarios? Again, we need to build in some agility within our roadmaps as well, right? To better manage surprises along the way. Number seven, Let's review the services being provided by the project management office. So, we should have sort of a menu. When you walk into a restaurant, you're presented with a menu of offerings. Well, the project management office should really also have something like that, where it's clearly identified as to what a project management office is doing for us, and in turn what the project management teams are doing for us, right? And what can they do? Where can they step in to help? And what can they do during turbulent times, such as the ones you and I are encountering nowadays? Number 8, look, the most important resource in most organizations that require skilled labor, right? So there are two types of labor, right? So Dan Pink, in his book Drive, talks about the fact that we have skilled labor and unskilled labor. Both are extremely valuable and honored and to be respected, but skilled labor really requires our intellectual capacity and our ability to connect mentally with the work, and that requires a certain sense of purpose, requires a certain sense of autonomy, a certain sense of mastery. And those kinds of things only happen when people are motivated and they feel connected. They feel that they're in an environment where they can actually collaborate. For that to happen, it's important to stay connected. So, when we're going through a crisis, many times we're so busy just dealing with the crisis, we forget about the people who are associated within the organization. It's important to step away, breathe a little. So when we were doing 100%, here in the US at the moment, we're sort of going back to sort of a hybrid environment in most organizations. But when we were 100% remote, initially, all we were doing was just work, work, and work. And it was burning people down, and people started calling in sick and taking, a lot more PTOs, and which again is an unhealthy sign. So we started building within our organizations explicit, deliberate time to actually sit back, relax, and enjoy. So virtual coffee breaks, virtual happy hours, just regular one-on-one check-ins where we talk about things other than work. Just talk about football, talk about your family, talk about, what's going on here and there, something, talk about the latest in what Justin Bieber is doing, if that's important to you. Number 9, we all have to lead by example. And when I say this, this isn't really just a responsibility. A lot of times when we read a note or see something like lead by example, we think it's the responsibility of the president or the prime minister or the king or the board of directors. Actually, that's not true. Servant leadership teaches us that everyone should be leading by example, right? Everyone. So this is again a mindset shift that you build within your associates and your team. So when you onboard resources, you let everybody know that they all have a leadership role to play within the organization. It doesn't matter what role you have. Again, that could be a tangential, very long conversation about what does leadership really mean and why is it at every single layer and every single level of the organization, right? But if everyone is leading by example, if you could visualize such a romantic place in the world, then we'd comfortably actually be able to lead amongst this, you know, chaos that we're dealing with, all this anxiety, this fear, this uncertainty, right? And one very important thing is that we keep emphasizing to our associates that we're all here for each other. So we actually support each other. Those are again some agile practices that are built into several of the agile frameworks where they talk about role blending and T-shaped skills, where they talk about the need to support each other along the way with the work. But it also means just taking care of each other. And the 10th, last but not least, is to continue to professionally develop the team, right? So senior leaders within the organization need to continue to form new leaders. It's very, very important to assess the level of competence the resources have. And as we identify gaps, a lot of gaps will typically emerge during times of crisis. And that's fine. That's very good. Let's take advantage of our ability to identify these gaps and figure out how do we step up to the next level? How do we take the organization on through either formal training, on the job training, through coaching, through mentoring, through teaching, whatever it may be. So as a recap, you know, we really can and should leverage project management principles to help further team resilience in organizations. I walked you through 10 secrets to achieving a successful project outcome in uncertain times, such as the ones we're dealing with today. And I've got to tell you, this isn't going to be the first one or the last crisis, right, in the world. You and I have seen several. When I came out of college, it was just around the time the Y2K was happening, and then the dot-com bust happened. And the world felt like it was all going to fall apart. And then unfortunately, 9/11 happened right around the corner after that, and then we got hit with the financial crisis in 2008, and then I mean, you can just keep going. We can get all dismal and negative here about the things that happen in the world, whether they're man-made or natural. So this isn't going to be the first or the last by any means. So we need to be prepared for the fact that we live in a world of VUCA. Right? I take you back to this slide. A world where volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity are there. So we need to build that resilience within our associates and team members. We don't want them thinking that they're living in Disneyland. We live in a world which is real, where there is increasing volatility, increasing uncertainty, where things are so interdependent between each other that, a decision that's made in, China impacts global trade across the world. Something that happens to one company in Hong Kong has an impact on Wall Street, and what happens in Burkina Faso affects what happens in London. So I mean, we're so interconnected that we actually, I think, if there's one thing that's humbling that we've learned is the need for us to really work collectively together as a global human race because of something like COVID-19, the fact that we're all getting affected by each other's behavior across the globe through this. All right, very good. Well, that was my conversation. I appreciate everyone plugging in. Any questions or comments? I'd love to hear from you all. I certainly appreciate everyone logging in and taking the time out to listen to us today. Um, Thank you for your time and energy. And I wish you all a continued healthy and safe wrap up of this week, and enjoy your weekend wherever you may be.